The system granted Jeff the returner fantasy system in response to his dying wish, and he woke up 12 years in the past with a second chance to change everything. Jeff rushed to Jess's apartment, pounded on the door, and shouted her name as Jess's aunt pointed him toward Jess's room in surprise. Jeff rushes into Jess's room and throws open the door as the countdown drops under 10 seconds, while Jess stands frozen in white undergarments holding a white lingerie slip dress. Jeff proposed to Jess before the countdown reached 0, and the system confirmed that Quest 1 was completed and he earned the right to become a returner. Jess, shocked and embarrassed, shoves Jeff aside and tries the locked door after hearing it click shut behind him. Jess called for her mother, but only faint giggling answered her, and Jeff pressed her back against the door in a caved-on pose. Jess demanded what Jeff was doing, then mocked his proposal and pointed out that he had no ring. Jeff looked down, picked up the ring that had slid through the door gap, and knelt to place it on Jess's finger as he repeated his proposal with determination. Jess, seated in her gaming chair and wearing the slip dress, glares down at Jeff and demands an explanation for his sudden proposal. Jeff confessed that he proposed because he loved Jess, and Jess immediately hit him with a pillow in embarrassed outrage. Jess reminded Jeff that they were basically siblings, born minutes apart and raised side by side like family, and she joked that they might as well be twins. They attended the same schools and celebrated birthdays together until age 16, and to Jeff, Jess felt like a twin sister and family. Jeff started to explain that they were not blood-related, but Jess struck him again with a pillow and demanded to know why he had ignored her for 4 years before coming back. Jess threatens to make Jeff jump out the 4th-floor window and demands that he explain himself. Jeff confessed that he had felt guilty about masturbating to thoughts of Jess every night in middle school, and he admitted that his lust had started even before then but was always hidden around her. Jeff admits that he fantasized about Jess several times a day and felt crushing guilt whenever he climaxed thinking of her, especially when she treated him like more than a brother. Jeff decides that he will not run away from his feelings for Jess again. A burst of laughter came from outside the room, but neither Jeff nor Jess noticed. Jess froze, stunned and speechless, while Jeff sat silently, aware of the awkwardness. Jess made Jeff repeat his confession, then straddled him on the floor and struck him with the last pillow within reach while calling him a pervert. Jess scolded Jeff for secretly doing that every night during middle school while they still acted like siblings. Jeff admitted that the guilt and punishment were part of what turned him on, and Jess called him a pervert again as his face reddened under the repeated blows. Jess stopped hitting Jeff and tried to get up, but Jeff wrapped his arms around her and pulled her into a tight embrace. Jess muttered for Jeff to let go, trying to sound stern, but she buried her face in his chest and silently gave in. Jess bit Jeff on the shoulder, and he recoiled in surprise and pain as he told her it hurt. Jess pulled back and stared at Jeff while he awkwardly admitted that her bites had always turned him on, then asked how much of a pervert he was. An hour later, Jess had settled the discussion and banged on the locked door, shouting for her mother to stop fooling around and open it. Jeff tried the stubborn door himself and suggested that Jess's aunt might have tied it to something as Jess stepped back to give him room. Jess screams in surprise, strikes Jeff again, and calls him a pervert as he drops to his knees while still holding her waist. Jess shouted for him to get away while Jeff begged to stay a little longer with his face buried against her belly, and her smartphone rang with a message from her mother. Jess reads her mother's message in embarrassed disbelief after kneeing Jeff in the chest and making him collapse. Jess threw the phone onto the bed and screamed in embarrassment, demanding that the door be opened. Jeff realized that he had been allowed to sleep in Jess's room, though not on the same bed yet. Jeff complained about the cold, hard floor, while Jess suggested jumping out the 4th-floor window, and Jeff weighed his options. Jess warned him not to touch her plushy throne, told him he deserved the punches, and ignored Jeff's complaint that it was getting hard to breathe. Jess relented and told Jeff to get onto the bed. Jeff climbed onto the bed beside Jess, promised not to do anything she disliked, and hugged her from behind. Jeff said he missed being that close to Jess, apologized for ignoring her, and tried to lighten the moment by reminding her that they used to sleep like that before. Jess called Jeff a pervert and teased him that she did not remember anything big and hard poking her back then. Jeff slid lower and thrust forward, making Jess cry out in surprise at the sudden stimulation. Jess jabbed Jeff in the stomach with her elbow and reminded him that he had promised not to do anything she disliked. Jeff asked whether Jess liked what was happening, and her silence left him worried that he had gone too far. Jeff asks Jess to turn around and face him, and she slowly does so while avoiding his gaze as he asks whether that had been her first kiss. Jess glared at Jeff and reminded him that he had stolen her first kiss at middle school graduation and then ignored her, while Jeff suggested that he should return that kiss. Jess turned to face Jeff, and when he leaned in for a brief kiss, she grabbed him and kissed him back while telling him no one told him to return it. That night ended with Jeff and Jess falling asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Jeff sank into a deep, exhausted sleep without noticing that a new quest had begun. Jess stays awake, quietly touching herself in frustration while Jeff sleeps nearby, but she cannot reach climax. Frustrated, Jess muttered that it was Jeff's fault, then rose to straddle him and slipped her white dress off her shoulders before whispering idiot with resolve. Jess pulls down Jeff's shorts and underwear, then presses forward and grinds against him after removing her panties. Jess trembles at the peak of climax, briefly collapsing onto Jeff before straddling him again and continuing to grind against him. Jess panted and tried to justify the moment to herself, but Jeff suddenly grabbed her wrists and pulled her down onto him as she watched his sleeping expression and felt the warm release spill onto her body. Jess had told Jeff to wake up or she would do everything she wanted, and the next morning, he awoke naked with Jess lying on top of him under a bedsheet. Jeff smiles as he pats Jess's head and brushes her hair while she stirs awake and opens her eyes. Jess smiled at Jeff, then blushed deeply as she remembered what she had done to him the previous night. Jess's embarrassment turns into anger as she punches Jeff, then jumps back to the edge of the bed while he sits shamelessly and covers himself with a wolf plushie. Jess stayed at the other end of the bed, clutching the bedsheet over her naked body while Jeff sat opposite her. Jeff concluded that Jess had done something to him while he was asleep. Jess kicked Jeff in the face when he teased her, but he stayed conscious and joked about giving her his virginity. Jess denied doing anything like that and told him to stop acting like she was the predator. Jess unlocked the door and kicked Jeff out after he dressed, and Jeff stumbled into the hallway where Jess's mother told him to shower and wait for Jess. Jeff sat alone in the living room, remembering that he had died of an incurable disease at 32, and that a mysterious voice had granted him the returner fantasy system to send him 12 years into the past and change the future for himself and Jess. Jeff realizes that he has already completed 2 quests, including proposing to Jess, and suspects that Jess did something to him while he was asleep. Jess's mother dragged Jess into the living room and told Jeff that Jess was ready. Jess scolds Jeff for staring while her mother pushes them forward and reminds them about the birthday timing. Jeff remembered that yesterday had been Jess's 20th birthday and that today was his own, then tried once more to get Jess's answer to his proposal as they walked back to his house. Jess called him an idiot, and Jeff answered that he would be her idiot forever as she tried to walk ahead without giving him a final answer. Jeff asked about the bags Jess carried, and Jess denied that they were moving in together. At Jeff's home, Jess was warmly welcomed by his family, who treated her like a daughter. Jeff's mother guided Jess toward the living room, while Jeff's brothers dragged Jeff upstairs and forced him to kneel on the bedroom floor, waiting for their mother's arrival. Jeff told his mother that he had realized his foolishness and vowed to make amends by marrying Jess and making her his official daughter-in-law. His mother acknowledged his priorities, but her forgiveness was not immediate. Unknown to Jeff, his recorded vow is being played at his 20th birthday celebration, which is centered on entertaining Jess while Jeff is sent out on errands. Jess, embarrassed but composed, tells the guests that they are still talking about their relationship while Jeff's declaration video plays and the crowd laughs and asks about the wedding. Just before midnight, Jeff and Jess sit alone on the balcony watching their family's afterparty below as Jess leans on his shoulder and sips the non-alcoholic flavored beer he offered her. Jeff suggests a snack while Jess takes a chip and watches him suspiciously. Jeff asked about his gift, and Jess snapped a chip between her teeth with open irritation as she resented his 4 years of silence. Jeff reminded Jess that his gift this time was his proposal and his virginity, and Jess took his right hand, lacing their fingers together while digging her nails into his palm. Jeff winced and asked what Jess wanted, and Jess asked if they could do it tonight before teasing him about becoming her girlfriend. Jess said she might consider it if Jeff made amends for ignoring her for 4 years, and Jeff promised to make it up to her while his returner fantasy system displayed a new quest. Jess shouted that she did not have a boyfriend and pinned Jeff to the floor with her nails digging into his shoulders. Jeff realized that Jess's fury came from loyalty and the pain of being abandoned, and he wondered whether Trud had truly been her boyfriend. Jeff recalled Jess's painful past when she became pregnant at 20, lost the baby in a miscarriage, and was then abandoned by her boyfriend after learning she could no longer conceive. Jeff apologizes sincerely to Jess and wraps his arms around her as he realizes how differently things could have turned out. Jess buried her face in Jeff's chest and admitted that Trud had courted her, but she had never wanted to be his girlfriend. Jeff asked Jess to turn Trud down so he could complete the quest, then held her tightly and breathed in her scent. Jess answered Trud's call and told Trud never to contact her again, while Jeff protested beside her, and the system marked Quest 3 complete. Jeff stopped Jess from ending the call, stared at Trud on the screen, and cut the connection with a cold insult. Jess glared at him, understanding his implication, and Jeff ended the night by releasing her and lifting her bridal style toward his room. Jess gasped, blushed, and wrapped her arms around Jeff's neck as he reassured her that they would not do anything yet if she wanted, though she would sleep in his room tonight. Jess nodded, still flustered, as Jeff carried her toward his room and they settled beside each other on his bed, holding one another. Jess Jess fell asleep quickly and tightened her embrace around Jeff while he gently held her and examined the rewards from the second and third quests of the Returner fantasy system. Jeff read Jess's archive and realized that, in his previous timeline, Jess had accepted Trud as her boyfriend to make him jealous. He held Jess more tightly, overcome with guilt, and then read Trud's archive to discover that Trud had blackmailed Jess into becoming his girlfriend. Jeff muttered that Trud was going to die for what he had done, and Jess stirred awake just enough to hear his promise to protect her. Jeff woke up to Jess lightly dressed on top of him in his room, then pulled her into his arms and rolled them so she ended up pinned beneath him on the bed. Jess squealed as Jeff pressed against her through their thin clothing, and the two of them stayed locked together in a heated, breathless grind. Jess bit Jeff's neck hard enough to snap him fully awake, then let go when he told her it hurt and asked her to stop. Jess headbutts Jeff off the bed and tells him they need to get ready or they will miss the service bus. Jess reminds Jeff that their vacation trip starts today, the day after his birthday, and Jeff notices his packed travel bag beside the bed. Jeff asks Jess to help him with his arousal, and Jess freezes in embarrassed silence. They still had time before the 6 a.m. meeting, so Jeff pushed Jess back onto the bed and asked what she wanted to do next. Jess stayed silent and dazed as Jeff kissed her, and suggested they wait until the hotel at the resort before continuing, and she answered with an insult while blushing with excitement. Jeff and Jess finish getting ready to leave, while Jeff's mother teases them about protection and priorities during the family goodbye. Jess interrupted the moment and dragged Jeff away before any more embarrassing comments could be made. The birthday confession video had already spread among their friends, and the arriving service bus brought a wave of prepared teasing. Als sich die Bustuer öffnet, Jehin Jess und Jeff gemeinsam über den roten Teppich zum Schuppen, während Blutenblätter aus den Fenstern fallen, und ein Foto mit der Aufschrift Just Got Married macht. Jeff and Jess, blushing and smiling in their matching white jackets, thank their instructor and hurry onto the service bus because they are running late. On the service bus, Jess slept with her head on Jeff's shoulder, while Jeff silently replayed the details of their earlier 3-day trip to East Coast City and resolved to stop Trud from hurting her again. After more than an hour of travel, the bus stopped at a mountain road service station. Jeff spoke with Chris and Mark while noticing Jess browsing with her friends at the service station. Jeff asked them to watch over Jess and keep anyone from bothering her. Mark joked that Jess would handle any troublemakers. Chris asked where Jeff was going, and Jeff called it a side quest before asking Jess for permission to step away. Jess told Jeff to do what he wanted despite her true feelings, and Jeff held her close to calm her down while she whispered that everyone could see them and hid her face against his chest. Jeff told her to say something and promised to return soon. He then explained to the instructor that his mother had asked him to buy something nearby before heading toward Trud's location on the holographic archive interface. Jeff mutters about Trud while reading more from the archive in a taxi headed toward the Mountain Nest Hotel. Jeff reflects on Trud's privileged background as the mayor's only legal son and the owner of the apartment where Jess and her mother live. Jeff, wearing a black cap and gray hoodie, buys camping supplies at the gas station convenience store instead of going straight into the Mountain Nest Hotel. Jeff emptied the gallon in the gas station restroom. Jeff pretended to buy a gallon of gasoline from the clerk, who accepted the payment without suspicion, and then noticed Trud's luxury sports car taking up 3 parking spaces in the hotel lot. Jeff kicks the butane canisters under the car's engine, tips the gasoline-filled gallon into place, and tosses the lit lighter as he walks away. The gasoline ignited, engulfing the car in flames and destroying the engine as bystanders screamed and ran when the fire reached the butane canisters and rocked the parking lot with an explosion. Jeff used the chaos to disappear into the crowd, leaving his disguise behind as the Returner fantasy system marked Quest for complete and granted him the Returner curse. The Mountain Nest Hotel catered to travelers seeking more than a place to sleep, and in room 401, the most expensive hostess prepared for a 2-hour private session booked by Trud. While showering in room 401, the hostess recalled Trud's handsome, muscular presence and touched herself in private as her arousal intensified. She trembles as she reaches climax while imagining Trud hiding a monster rod in his pants. A loud moan echoed from the bathroom, and the hostess emerged in a semi-transparent white bathrobe while Trud waited on the bed. Trud told her he had not paid so much just to listen to her pleasure herself, then grabbed her waist and pushed her down onto the bed. The hostess's eyes glaze with lust as her robe slips open, and she suggests skipping foreplay while Trud climbs onto the bed and bares his toned body. The hostess hid her disappointment, spread her arms in welcome, and Trud lifted her before thrusting into her in one motion. Trud suddenly stops and pulls out, ending the encounter awkwardly as the hostess keeps up her fake pleasure. The hostess storms into the manager's office in her bathrobe and screams about Trud's humiliating performance. The manager offered to help with her frustration, holding the hostess's hands down on his desk as she pressed back against him and he kissed her neck. The manager and the hostess hostess remain locked in a heated embrace as she urges him to stop teasing and take her fully. The manager kisses the hostess while keeping his hands on her breasts as they move together in overwhelming pleasure. She convulsed in bliss, steadied herself on the desk, and thanked the manager as he lifted her back onto it. She noticed that he had not finished yet and offered to help, then leaned back and spread her legs wide as he pinned her to the desk and thrust into her again and again. At the Mountain Nest Hotel, Jeff browsed the returner curse list and found the 1-Minute Man curse, which he could afford to invoke with his recent quest reward. Jeff invoked the curse on Trud, while Henry and Francis stepped out of their rooms in the hotel lobby, satisfied after their sessions with the hostesses Trud had booked. Trud sat sulking, trying to make sense of his expensive session with the top hostess, while still admiring his muscular body and imagining that every woman was left breathless by him. Henry and Francis feigned surprise at Trud's early return while privately mocking him and clinging to him for his money and women. Trud said he was saving his stamina for his girlfriend tonight, and Henry and Francis immediately asked when they would get their turn with her. Trud brushed them off, insisting that he would never tire of her. Trud stormed inside in fury, demanding compensation from the guard and the hotel manager after finding the luxury sports car reduced to scorched metal. The manager reminded Trud of the waiver he had signed and offered CCTV footage from the parking lot to help identify the arsonist. The video showed a man in a gray hoodie and black cap setting the car on fire while moving with precise, deliberate care to stay out of every camera's view. Jeff swore revenge on the arsonist, vowed to ruin the hotel, and confirmed that he was still going to see his girlfriend. At the Mountain Nest Hotel, Jeff completed Quest 4, Interference, and received the Returner Curse as his reward. Jeff's friends joked about him robbing a bank, but he denied it, and later Nubia arrived as his driver after his flawless escape from the hotel in a prearranged getaway car. Jeff thanked Nubia for picking him up, and Nubia said driving him was her way of making up for missing his birthday. Jeff recalled how Nubia had supported him through his illness and after his death, and he silently vowed to protect her this time. Nubia teased him about his murderous expression and joked that he looked ready to commit a crime. Jeff assured Nubia that he would never murder anyone or involve her in a crime, and they kept bantering as they drove into East Coast City and arrived at the beach resort just before noon. After parking, Nubia handed Jeff a parcel, and he opened it to find an expensive engagement ring box beyond his savings. Nubia told Jeff to make his proposal count, and Jeff reminded her that he had already proposed to Jess once but had forgotten the ring. Nubia playfully hit him and offered a deal. In exchange for the ring, Jeff would give her his girlfriend. Jeff agreed to the terms, waved goodbye, and ran toward the beach where Jess was waiting. At the beach, Quest 5 began with Jeff determined to save Jess from sexual harassment within 30 minutes. Jeff now has to protect Jess from the harassers while carefully avoiding public violence. 10 minutes remained on the countdown, and Jeff's friends Chris and Mark teased him about ogling Jess while warning him to behave. Jeff insisted that he was not looking at Jess inappropriately and was only timing his move to complete the quest, while Chris and Mark kept discussing his relationships with Vina and Klee nearby. Jeff said he would handle Klee's boyfriend and promised to look after Nubia when the time came. Chris and Mark teased Jeff for supposedly building a harem, then bring up Mina and Mira and tell him to ask Jess about them as thanks for watching over her. Jeff told them to shut up, and Chris and Mark kept proudly explaining their absurd harem lord graduation title. Jeff listened in disbelief as Chris claimed he had changed his ways and was loyal to the 3 girls he was currently dating, while Mark said he now asked his girlfriends for permission before adding a new one. Jeff stared at Chris and Mark in disbelief, silently accepting that they were still harem lords. Jeff stood up, told Chris and Mark he was continuing the main quest, and then dove into the ocean to swim toward Jess. Jeff reaches Jess in time and pulls her into a tight underwater embrace as the wave sweeps away the top of her swimsuit. Jess screams in embarrassment as she covers her chest with both hands and buries her face against Jeff's chest after realizing who was holding her. Jeff glared fiercely at the men on the beach and whispered to Jess that they should calm down and leave. Jeff carried Jess bridal style while she kept her chest covered and rested her face against his shoulder. Mina and Mira stop Jeff and Jess to demand an explanation, and Jeff reassures them that he will look after Jess before they reluctantly let them pass. After the quest ended, Jeff carried Jess into the resort hotel while she stayed clinging to him and hiding in his arms. Jess unlocked the room door and hurried inside to change, but Jeff stopped her from shutting him out. Jeff insists on coming inside with Jess, and Jess immediately tells him to wait outside while she changes. Jeff reminded Jess that they had bathed together as children, and Jess blushed with embarrassment as the hallway crowd listened and made lewd remarks. Mortified, Jess pulled Jeff inside and slammed the door, then warned him not to do anything perverted. The new quest requires Jeff to have Jess swallow his semen within 5 hours to earn a reward. Jeff gently pulls Jess closer and holds her in an embrace, trying to soften the moment and keep her from pulling away. Jeff, visibly aroused, asks Jess to help help him calm down while she warns him not to do anything perverted and still does not pull away. Jess asked whether he wanted something in return, and Jeff admitted that he did while softening his tone and telling her she was the only one he could rely on. Jess surprises Jeff by hugging him and asking what he wants her to do, and Jeff suggests that they take a shower together first while asking whether he really has to wear a blindfold in the bathroom. Jess told him he had to keep the blindfold on, snapping at Jeff while she blushed in only a towel, and he stood beside her in a matching towel around his waist. Jess sighed, took Jeff's hand, and guided him toward the shower first. At the shower, Jess removed her towel, hesitated briefly over Jeff's towel, and then took it away despite her embarrassment. Jess hesitates to remove Jeff's towel herself, worried that doing so would reveal she undressed him the night before and make her seem perverted. Jeff begins to remove his own towel, startling Jess, who immediately calls him a pervert while he reminds her that she has seen him naked recently. Jess answered with another insult, then looked at Jeff and asked why he was so hard after noticing his aroused body. Jess punched Jeff in the gut, and he doubled over against her as they kept arguing about who was provoking whom. Jess scratched Jeff's back and bit his shoulder, and after he calmed down, he pinned her between his arms against the wall. Jeff leans close to Jess and asks if she can help him as the charged moment between them deepens. Jess, flustered, asked what Jeff wanted, and then she used both hands to pleasure him more gently. Jeff moaned softly as Jess bit her lip to keep her own sounds quiet, and he finally climaxed, splashing his release onto her stomach and hands. Jess whispered to Jeff about what he wanted to do next, then turned her back to him as he pinned her hands against the wall with their fingers intertwined. Jess warned him not to put it in, and Jeff promised to respect her wishes as he lowered his hips and whispered to her in the shower. Jess moaned loudly but bit her lip to keep herself quiet, while Jeff paused with close contact and urged her not to hold back her voice. Jess began to moan more openly as Jeff continued the intimate contact between her thighs. Jess trembles as she nears climax, while Jeff steadies her from behind with a slow, firmer thrust. Jeff resumes slow movement in the shower, while Jess remains trembling and sensitive after orgasm. Jess, still sensitive after orgasm, asks Jeff to stop moving for a moment, but Jeff says he wants to come again and then asks for help calming down with her mouth. Jess was silent for a moment, then leaned back and whispered that they should go to bed after brushing Jeff's ear with her lips. Jess sat on her bed in a damp towel, burying her flushed face in her hands as she silently screamed about agreeing to this. Jeff sat beside Jess on the bed, blindfolded and wrapped in a wet towel, while Jess stood flustered after leaving the shower and replaying her recent research in her mind. Jess realizes that she agreed to continue with Jeff because being bridal carried away from the lecherous men excited her and stirred something deep inside her. Jess sits on the bed, caught between affection and hesitation as she prepares to please Jeff. Jess's resolve falters as she fixes her gaze on the bulge beneath Jeff's towel and guides his hand into the right position while telling him to stand in front of her. Jess unwrapped the towel from Jeff's waist and leaned in close, studying his reaction as she considered her next move. Jess grips Jeff with both hands, strokes him gently, and opens her mouth to take the head in. Before their lips met, Jeff asked whether he still had to wear the blindfold, and Jess reacted with feigned irritation as he said he wanted to see her because it was their first time. Jess called him a pervert, stood up, and removed his blindfold before Jeff pulled her close and kissed her. Jess deepened the kiss, then pulled back and asked Jeff whether he still needed her mouth down there. Jeff whispered that he would really love that as Jess settled back down and continued pleasuring him with her hands and mouth. Jeff nearly lost control, but he held back while watching Jess look up at him for reassurance. Jeff brushes hair from Jess's eyes and touches her ear as Jess leans in, then pulls back gagging after trying to take more of him into her mouth. Jeff expressed concern and told her that she did not have to force herself because it was her first time. Jess insisted she could take it all in and continued slowly, keeping her eyes fixed on Jeff as she struggled through the moment. Jeff asks Jess to pull back a little so he can finish in her mouth. Jess obeyed and pulled back just enough to leave only the head inside as Jeff climaxed. Then a string of saliva and semen stretched between his tip and her lips when he withdrew. Jess closed her mouth, covered it with both hands, and swallowed hard while Jeff told her to finish swallowing everything. Jess opened her mouth to show that she had swallowed everything and asked whether that was enough to calm Jeff down. Jeff asks if they can do a little more, then eases Jess down onto the bed and reaches between her thighs. Jess shoved Jeff back with both hands and turned her face away just as he leaned in to kiss her. Jeff wanted Jess to agree because she loved him, not because he had worn her down. Jess turned away and asked Jeff why he was trying to kiss her after what had just happened. Jess, furious and embarrassed, calls Jeff a disgusting pervert and swings a weak punch at him as he laughs at her remark. Jess nodded, then Jeff laughed harder as Jess blushed and called him a disgusting pervert again before he pushed her onto the bed and whispered that he should use his mouth as well. Jeff resumes teasing Jess from above, keeping the intimate pressure on her in the bedroom. Jess whispered for him to wait, but Jeff kept teasing her until she punched him hard enough to stop the intimacy. Jess snapped back at Jeff while pressing a handkerchief to his bleeding nose, and her glance dropped toward the sheet when she noticed his arousal still showing beneath it. Jeff noticed her reaction, smiled knowingly, and leaned in for another kiss as Jess pulled back and said she did not want her friends to catch them. Jeff reminded her that he had already sent her friends away for a while, but Jess still hesitated, afraid that giving him everything too quickly would make him lose interest. Jeff abandons the kiss and pulls Jess into a warm embrace as she wraps her arms around his back and draws him down onto the bed with her. Jess melted into Jeff's arms and slowly drifted off to sleep while Jeff stood alone on the dimming East Coast city beach, waiting for dusk to fall. Jeff needed time to process everything that had happened since receiving the returner fantasy system and regressing 12 years into the past. Right before Jess's 20th birthday ended, he had reconciled with Jess and reunited with family and friends. Jeff leaves Jess asleep in the room and walks away, still struggling to resist his urges after their intimate time together. Jeff stood on the beach while Chris and Mark came up to him, resting their hands on his shoulders and speaking as if they knew exactly what had happened with Jess. They told him he had lost something he could never get back, even if it was something to be proud of. Jeff angrily denied that anything had happened between him and Jess, while Chris and Mark shouted that he was no longer a virgin, and the nearby crowd heard them. Jeff insisted that he would not force Jess to do anything she did not want, while Chris and Mark kept insisting that they had sex, and Jeff denied it vehemently. The argument escalates as a large wave crashes onto the beach, sending Jess's white swimsuit top to Jeff's feet before Mark snatches it away and lifts it overhead like a trophy. Chris lays out the wrestling rules, while Mark challenges Jeff for the swimsuit in front of them. The match began as Mark tried to shove the swimsuit into his trunks, but Jeff tackled him to the ground and pinned him while reaching for it. Mark threw sand into Jeff's eyes and shoved him away, then reached to slip the swimsuit into his trunks while Jeff blinked and staggered. Jeff yanks Mark's swim trunks off entirely at the last second to stop the match from being completed. Jeff pulls Mark's trunks away and realizes that Mark has lost the contest because he can no longer meet the rules without them. Jeff claims victory by stuffing the swimsuit into his own trunks, while Mark rushes in retaliation and strips Jeff bare on the beach. The crowd screamed again at the sight of another exposed man, and Jeff and Mark turned toward Chris, the only friend left unhumiliated. Chris tried to flee, but Jeff and Mark grabbed him and exposed him as well, completing the trio. The crowd shouted that people were recording videos. Jess glared at Jeff and Mark and demanded to know what they had done, accusing them both of inappropriate behavior. Jeff and Mark told her to shut up, and Jeff kept eating meat at the resort hotel buffet while Jess glared at him without touching her food. Jeff worries about Jess's feelings and wonders whether she is angry with him or upset by what they have done. Jess woke up alone just after sunset and felt a wave of anxious fear about what might have happened while she slept. Jess trembles with fear as tears well in her eyes, and her smartphone vibrates with a message from Jeff that revives a conversation from 4 years ago. Jess smiled through tears as she approached Jeff at the end of the buffet, still feeling both happiness and lingering anger while he struggled to stand after overeating. Jess grabbed Jeff by the collar and dragged him toward the beach, while Chris and Mark left immediately. At the beach, Jess throws Jeff's white jacket into his face and drives a punch into his gut, forcing him down to his knees in the sand. Jeff held back his nausea and demanded an explanation, while Jess snapped that it was for leaving her alone after everything they had done. Jeff tries to explain and tease Jess about their privacy, but Jess punches him again before he can finish speaking. Jess, red-faced and flustered, stammers out a question about whether she and Jeff had sex while Jeff lies on the sand after the punch, still holding onto his dinner. Jess wondered whether Jeff had done anything, and she stared at the bloodstain on the bed sheets with uneasy uncertainty. Jeff gently embraces Jess and whispers reassurance that he will not do anything she would not like, and Jess relaxes into his chest. Jess says that Jeff was not there when she woke up, her voice trembling with hurt and confusion. Jess was most hurt that Jeff had broken his promise, and Jeff apologized sincerely while promising not to leave her again. Jess softened but warned Jeff that he would have to make it up to her, and Jeff turned his apology into an invitation for a date that night. Jess relaxed as Jeff walked beside them through the lively beach festival, and the two moved together with the easy familiarity of childhood. Jess urged Jeff to hurry to the next stall, warning him not to pull her arm so hard. Jess held up different animal masks at the stall and asked Jeff which one would suit her best, calling him an idiot with a teasing grin. Jeff pointed out the contradiction in Jess's insult, and when she turned away after putting the masks back, he grabbed her hand to stop her and insisted that he would choose one himself. Jess said she was no longer in the mood and wanted to leave, but Jeff admitted that he wanted to see her wearing a mask. Jess returned to the stall and gave Jeff a sharp glare to hurry him, and Jeff gently placed a white cat half mask on her face while joking that she suited a black cat more. Jess was satisfied with the choice and put a matching white wolf half mask on Jeff so they would look like a couple and he would have an excuse to kiss her. Before they could kiss, the stall owner's cheeky remark embarrassed Jess, and she hurried Jeff to pay before dragging him away. Jeff and Jess settle on the beach with their large meal while watching the fire dancers perform by the water. Jeff sat on the sand with Jess on his lap, and Jess asked whether he realized they were still outside with people around them before Jeff confirmed it. Jess says she is trying to eat because she skipped food earlier after being upset with Jeff, then cuts him off when she notices his aroused state pressing against her back. Jeff admits that their closeness has aroused him and buries his face in Jess's nape, while Jess scolds him for acting that way in public without telling him to stop. As Jess ate beside him, Jeff reviewed the rewards from quests 5 and 6, and a holographic screen appeared in his vision with Trud's archive update as quest 5 reward. The reward for quest 6 was Returner Cure, which could heal Jess's weak womb only after she received Jeff's come 100 times. Jeff grew even more excited by the quest reward, and Jess asked whether he was about to climax before he leaned in to whisper that he needed help with what they had done earlier. Jess understood, froze in surprise, and grew more aroused as Jeff whispered again that he could not hold himself back anymore. Jess rose from Jeff's lap, knelt before him, and leaned in to continue pleasuring him. After Jeff finishes, Jess lifts her head and looks at him dazedly, silently asking what to do next. Jeff holds Jess close in the dark room after she asks if that was enough. He saw only her silhouette in the dim room. Jess did not resist, pulled Jeff closer, and asked if he had enough already as he kissed her neck. Jeff said he wanted more of Jess, then pulled her close and kissed her neck again. Jess could only make a soft sound as pleasure washed over her, and she warned Jeff that her friends might be coming back soon. Jeff reminded Jess that she had suggested they continue in her hotel room, and Jess explained that she only said that because she expected him to keep going even outside. Jeff pulled back and studied Jess's face, quietly asking whether she wanted to keep going while he waited for her to forgive him. Jess replied that she only wanted to know whether it was enough for him, then teased Jeff by calling him a perv after his question. Jess falls silent for a moment, then buries her face in Jeff's chest and admits that she still hates him for ignoring her even though she loves him. Jeff apologized for his past stupidity, and Jess called him an idiot before pulling him into a passionate kiss. After releasing him, Jess said it was the last kiss for today, and Jeff offered to help her this time because she had helped him earlier. Jess was confused as Jeff removed both jackets, carried her to the bed, laid her down, undressed, and climbed on top of her. Jess remained calm until Jeff began helping her undress. Then she weakly punched him and called him a pervert as he pinned her beneath his naked body and whispered that it would be like what they had done earlier in the shower. Jess relaxed as Jeff pinned her down with his muscular body pressed against her. Jeff sat up, helped remove her slip dress, spread her legs, and began rubbing himself through her wet panties as Jess moaned in pleasure. Jess removes her panties herself and warns Jeff that she will be angry if he puts it in. Jeff agrees to Jess's terms and pins her down while she spreads her legs beneath him, the room filling with her moans and his heavy breathing as she bites his shoulder and digs her nails into his back from intense pleasure. Jess's body convulses as Jeff's body throbs harder, and his rubbing becomes faster at the height of their pleasure. Jess locked him in a tight embrace, biting deeply into his shoulder while trembling from an intense orgasm. Jeff reached his limit, releasing hot fluid onto her body while pressing his throbbing rod against her entrance. Silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing and startled gasps as Jess and Jeff heard voices questioning what they were doing. Jess switched on the lamp and found Mira and Mina naked beneath the covers on the other bed, staring back at them. Jess blushed, covered herself with a sheet, handed Jeff his clothes, and urged him to get dressed after the lamp revealed they were both naked and masked. Jess pushed Jeff out of the room while he was still barely dressed. Jess clarified that Jeff was not her boyfriend yet, while Mira and Mina reacted in disbelief to how intimate things had already become. Jess admitted that Jeff had not put it in yet, embarrassed to confess how far they had gone. Mira insisted that sex was sex even without penetration. Jess understood the true nature of Mira and Mina's relationship, and she was certain they had already been intimate before she and Jeff arrived. Sitting beside Jess on the bed, Mira whispers that Jess has hit the jackpot, while Mina adds that they have seen how large Jeff is. Mira and Mina pin Jess down on the bed while pressing her about vacation sex and suggesting that they share Jeff, even as they float the idea of a foursome. Jess grabbed Mira and Mina by the heads and smashed their foreheads together, warning them to stay away from Jeff. In the hotel, Jeff noticed a new quest from the Returner fantasy system after Jess kicked him out of the room. He read the quest details and began planning an ambush to prevent Trud from meeting Jess. Jeff found Chris and Mark asleep in his hotel room, woke them urgently, and demanded their help, which they agreed to give if the mission proved worthy of their Ironrod Legion pledge. Jeff explained that they were going to beat someone to death the next day, then used the system to pull up Trud's smartphone messages and expose Trud's plan to drug Jess during her vacation and force himself on her. Jeff told Chris and Mark that he wanted to save Jess, and the three of them prepared supplies while waiting in the hotel parking parking lot just before sunrise. Jeff, Chris, and Mark surround Trud's luxury sports car in the hotel parking lot, while Henry and Francis remain trapped inside. Trud tried to start the car, but Jeff poured gasoline onto the broken engine hood. Jeff held up a lighter while Trud, shaken by the gasoline smell, swore and aimed a pistol at him from inside the car. Henry and Francis stopped Trud out of fear for their own lives, while Jeff, Chris, and Mark had already made sure the gun could not be used. Chris had pried open the gas tank and held an ignited lighter close to it, warning that any attempt to use the gun would ignite the gasoline. Jeff has dragged Trud out of the car, thrown him onto the concrete, and handed the sledgehammer to Chris before challenging Trud to a fistfight. Trud stood up, snarled that Jeff would pay for what he had done, and charged at Jeff before Jeff kicked him in the groin and sent him to his knees. Henry and Francis stayed inside the car, watching without intervening, while Jeff grabbed Trud's head and slammed his face into the car door again and again, kicking him in the groin. Chris and Mark threaten Henry and Francis with the gasoline. Trud writhes in pain on the ground, and Jeff reaches for the sledgehammer again until Chris refuses to hand it over. Chris urged Jeff to stop, while Mark half-joked that Jeff should think of a plan that would not get him jailed for life. Jeff began to calm down as the police siren blared closer, while Jeff, Chris, and Mark ran off immediately, and Henry and Francis climbed out of the car to wave down the police. Two officers handcuff Henry and Francis, search their pockets, and arrest them for possessing illegal sex drugs, while Jess wakes up to Mira and Mina showing her a viral internet video. Jess forced herself out of bed and stared sleepily at the video about Trud and Jeff. The parking lot assault had been caught on CCTV and uploaded online, and the video showed Trud's face as he was dragged from his car and beaten. Jess asked how Mira and Mina could be sure Jeff was one of the masked men, and the twins teased her innocence while explaining that they recognized his body shape from earlier videos, including one with Jess and another involving Chris and Mark. Mira and Mina insist to Jess that the masked man in the video is Jeff and that the others are his friends. Jeff waits at the vacant lot beside the hotel as Jess arrives just before noon in a light brown summer hat and a white short slip dress. Jeff opens his arms to embrace Jess, but she stops and drives a straight right into his face. Jess lands a left body blow on Jeff, and he drops to his knees, clutching his stomach in confusion over her anger. Jeff looked up at Jess as she trembled with tears in her eyes and asked why he would do something so dangerous, fearing that something bad might happen to him or that the police might take him away. Jeff stood and embraced her, and Jess wrapped her arms around him and buried her face in his chest. Jess calmed down in Jeff's arms and told him she would punch him whenever and wherever she wanted. Jess pulled away, and Jeff asked what she wanted to do that day while she scolded him for wasting half the day since it was already noon. While waiting for Jess, Jeff receives another quest from the returner fantasy system and feels both excited and anxious as the countdown begins. Jeff thought the time had finally come and tried to keep a poker face, but Jess could still see how foolish he looked. Jeff urged Jess to hurry and asked whether she wanted to explore the beach or go alone with him to his hotel room, while Jess blushed in surprise as she realized what he was inviting her to do. Jess wanted to spend more time with Jeff and thought about exploring the beach first before going to his room in the evening. Jess realized that Jeff could not go to the beach today because Mira or Mina might recognize them. The hotel staff could be searching for them, and the police might return to arrest them. Jess assumed the danger was real, but Jeff believed no one would recognize them in their nude disguise, and that the hotel staff would not interfere now that the police were involved. Jeff, Chris, and Mark had contacted a police officer alumnus of Jeff's high school and a member of the Iron Rod Legion to report Trud's illegal sex drugs through their connections. Jeff wanted to explain the police setup to Jess, but he feared she would refuse to go to his hotel room if he did. Jeff needed a private place for the day because Quest 8 depended on Jess agreeing, and he already had a plan. Jeff reassures Jess that he will not do anything she dislikes, and Jess finally agrees to go to his hotel room.